If you think that China's economy is the most resilient one, perhaps you don't know what's happening right now in China. Its economy is hollow, which is quite hard to believe.
Beijing is grappling with a mounting debt crisis as investors ramp up calls for fiscal stimulus to boost the economy. So far, the government's actions have been underwhelming, to say the least when you're considering it from the market's point of view.
A recipe for the economic decline is manifesting itself lately, which has started brewing just a few years back. Back then, China did know the troubles of that time could unfold into something colossal. So the government tried to take control, but nothing really worked out until China reached a dead end. This is something which can cost China its entire economy, manufacturing capacity, and hence, the status of being the world's factory. But what are we talking about? Well, the demographic crisis, accompanied by the manufacturing and demand decline, is a perfect concoction for China's economic decline, shattering the dream to dethrone the US economy. In this video, we'll explain how everyone knows China's economy, but nobody asks how it is, which, in reality, is on its way to a grand fall. Here's a reminder to please like the video and subscribe, as it helps the YouTube algorithm to push our videos to you. Let's get started. Chapter 1. The Explosive Countdown. China's real estate sector makes up 30% of its GDP, becoming the single biggest contributor to the Chinese economy. This means that if the real estate market goes up in China, so does its economy, and the opposite is true if the variables are reversed. Recently, we're seeing a drop in property prices, which has triggered an economic slowdown. It should be noted that China has been boosting its economy by building projects as they create jobs and increase demand for raw products. That's why we see China building railways, airports, and buildings. Talking about building hundreds of skyscrapers in its aggressive urban development model, China built cities which remain vacant to this day. There's nothing wrong with those buildings. The problem is that there are not enough citizens to live in approximately 65 million vacant properties. Just to imagine the scale, these properties are enough to house the entire French population. The reason why China has vacant buildings, towns, and cities, often called ghost cities, is that China miscalculated its population. We'll come to that within a few minutes. You see, when there are surplus properties, the real estate price declines. When you have over 65 million properties, imagine the shockwaves, especially when the economy stands on the real estate sector. In a bid to boost the economy, China launched an aggressive urban development model where local governments eagerly auctioned the land. This land was bought by investors on mortgages, while for construction, additional loans were taken. Now, as there's no demand, property developers are left with debt burdens. Bloomberg reported that this debt is worth 12% of China's GDP. You can now understand how the Chinese economy is standing in the air. Back in 2021, the first controlled demolition in Kunming, China, demolished 15 high-rise buildings. This marked the start of a chain reaction, offering a possible but costly solution to the vacant buildings that are useless. However, the land holds value which can be used to build either malls or factories. But this too will not work, as every sector in China is destined to face a heavy blow due to the next crisis we will tell you about. Chapter 2. China's Population Problem. It's quite hard to trace the root cause of the economic decline in China. However, we can see all the crises clustered at a single point, which can be a possible initiator: China's population decline. If you can remember, China considered population growth a problem, and therefore it launched the famous one-child policy in 1979. At that time, the Chinese economy was in dire need of capital, so spending on having more than one child seemed irrational for the government. During that time, the Chinese population living in the villages was on the move to cities as they provided better job opportunities. But they needed homes, and more children meant more demand for already limited resources. Hence, the one-child policy was launched. However, the Chinese government made the dire mistake of continuing this policy for over 36 years. Chinese couples marrying in these years could only have one child, the only resource eater as China saw them. These single children later became known as Zhao Wandi, or Little Emperors, causing gender imbalance and a gap. You see, if 2 to 3 generations had only a single child, it would create a gap. because when the already present workforce will retire, there will not be enough workers to replace them. Not only that, but since every couple had one chance, they could not really try for another child, which could balance the gender ratio. As a result, China started to have an increase in the male population, further exacerbating the problem. By 2013, China began to realize the intensity of the problem. It understood that if the one-child policy continued, it would bring irreparable damages. Hence, relaxation took place, but what happened next was unexpected. The Chinese population, instead of welcoming the relaxation and having more children, chose not to have a second child. It's because they didn't want to spend extra on having a second child, especially due to the financial conditions. The government had earlier given a reason to have one child, but now there was no immediate benefit for the Chinese population to have a second child. Hence, the birth rate, instead of increasing, continued to decline, making China's future uncertain. It's because China not only needs a robust workforce to increase its production, but also for increased demands, which drives its economy. That's when we start to see the consequences of population decline. Since the Chinese population is declining, there's not enough demand in the market that can drive the economy. According to reports, fewer than 8 million births are expected in 2023 in China, which is the lowest since the wartime of 1939. For comparison, consider India, which has a population of 1,428,627,663, only 2.9 million more than China. However, in 2023, about 29 million babies will be born there. Chapter 3. Manufacturing and Economic Decline. As we told you before, population decline is not the sole problem. It's initiating a chain reaction. As of the latest updates, factory activity in China has contracted for the 5th consecutive month in August, increasing pressure on Beijing to implement additional stimulus measures to support the struggling economy. It should be noted that as soon as China opened its market and removed the zero-COVID policy, the demand pressure allowed the economy to boom. China leveraged this and expanded its economy. However, this was not sustainable, and we're seeing the results now as growth is stagnating. Demands are declining, causing consumer prices to fall. At the same time, a real estate crisis is worsening, and exports are experiencing a slump. The gravity of youth unemployment has reached a point where the government has ceased publishing relevant data. The last time, it was 21%. The Chinese yuan reached its lowest value in 16 years, leading the central bank to take unprecedented measures to defend the currency by setting a higher exchange rate against the dollar than the market's estimate. Debt defaults in the property sector also appear to be spreading to China's $2.9 trillion investment trust industry. Zhonglong Trust, for instance, has failed on bond payments, prompting protests from investors demanding payouts. Another major concern is the surge in local government debt, driven by a drop in land sale revenues due to the property market decline and the lingering effects of the pandemic lockdown costs. This fiscal stress at the local level not only poses risks to Chinese banks, but also constrains the government's ability to stimulate growth and expand public services. Chapter 4. Looking to the future. China is simultaneously struggling with a manufacturing decline, plummeting demands, and dropping real estate prices. Yet, there is no sustainable solution in sight, as population decline has ruled out the possibility. It will take China decades to reach the optimum level of population, which will increase demands for goods and properties which are today the ghost cities. At the same time, a lack of decisive measures to stimulate domestic demand, coupled with fears of economic contagion, have prompted a fresh round of growth downgrades. Several major investment banks have lowered their forecast for China's economic growth to below 4.5%. This is a significant withdrawal from China's official growth target of around 5.5%, which could be an embarrassment for President Xi Jinping's leadership. What will be China's future if its demography continues like this, making economic crises inevitable? If you liked the video, give it a like and subscribe for more videos. If you want to know more about geopolitics, you can check out more videos on our channel.